I left my wife, and it took her over a week to notice. I'm Reinhard, a 34-year-old graphic designer from Berlin. My wife, Lorelei, is a nurse. We had been together for nearly a decade, married for 5 years, but over the past few months, something in our relationship had changed. I noticed she was becoming distant, and I felt like I was slowly disappearing from her world. I tried talking to her, but every conversation ended in arguments or uncomfortable silences. One evening, after another fight about something trivial, I can't even remember what, I decided I'd had enough. I felt like a ghost in my own home, and I needed to find out if she'd even notice if I was gone. I know it sounds petty, but I was desperate to see if she cared enough to realize I wasn't there anymore. So, I made a plan. I took a week off from work under the pretense of a business trip, packed a suitcase, and left. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town under a false name, Emile. I felt like a spy or a criminal, but at least I wasn't invisible there. I didn't leave any note, didn't send any messages. I just disappeared. I thought it would be only a matter of hours before she called or texted, frantic and worried. But, shockingly, the first day passed without a word from Lorelei. I waited, constantly checking my phone, but nothing. The silence was deafening. By the second day, I was starting to question my own sanity. Maybe she had called and I'd missed it. Maybe she was at work and too busy to notice. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Lorelei and I used to be inseparable, constantly texting, calling, sharing every little detail of our lives. Where had that gone? I spent my days wandering around the new neighborhood, trying to keep myself busy. I found a small cafe where I could sit and work on my laptop, anything to distract myself from the growing sense of dread. I didn't want to believe that my wife didn't care enough to notice I was gone. The third day was worse. I started drinking early, trying to numb the pain. It was a Wednesday, and I remembered how we used to have date nights midweek to break the monotony. I wondered if she was sitting at home, on the couch we picked out together, watching our favorite show, and not even realizing I wasn't there. I called my friend Friedrich, the only person who knew about my plan. "Reinhard, are you sure this is a good idea?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "What if she's really worried and just can't reach you?" "She hasn't even tried," I replied bitterly. "I just need to know if she cares at all." By the fourth day, I was a wreck. My phone was still silent. No calls, no messages, nothing. I couldn't understand how the woman I loved, the woman I married, could just go on with her life as if nothing had happened. That evening, I decided to drive by our house. I needed to see if she was okay, if maybe something had happened to her. As I parked a few houses down and walked towards our home, my heart was pounding. I felt like an intruder in my own life. Through the living room window, I saw Lorelei sitting on the couch, her face illuminated by the TV. She looked calm, relaxed even. A bottle of wine was on the coffee table, and she was sipping from a glass. I felt a mixture of relief and anger. She was fine. More than fine, it seemed. As I watched her, I saw a man enter the room. He was tall, with dark hair and a confident stride. Lorelei looked up and smiled, a smile I hadn't seen in months. They started talking, and then, to my horror, he leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a passionate kiss, the kind that spoke volumes. My world shattered in that moment. The woman I loved, the woman I had been with for nearly a decade, was kissing another man in our home, on our couch, drinking our wine. I felt like a fool. All this time, I had been worried she didn't notice I was gone, but the truth was far worse. I stumbled back to my car, my mind racing. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what I had seen. Had she been seeing this man for a long time? Was this the reason she had become so distant? The next few days were a blur. I stayed in the rented apartment, trying to gather my thoughts. I didn't contact Lorelei, didn't confront her. I needed to figure out what to do next. Friedrich came over, bringing more beer and a much-needed reality check. "You need to talk to her, Reinhardt," he said, sitting across from me. "You can't just hide out here forever." "I know," I muttered, staring at the floor. But what do I say? Hey, I've been spying on you and saw you with another man? Friedrich sighed. You have to tell her you know. You deserve an explanation. On the 7th day, I finally mustered up the courage to go back home. I walked into the house, my heart pounding. Lorelei was in the kitchen, making coffee. She looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. Reinhard, where have you been? I stared at her, unable to find the words. I needed some time to think, I finally said, my voice trembling with barely suppressed anger. Lorelei looked confused. About what? About us, I replied, my voice rising. About why you didn't even notice I was gone for a week. She blinked, clearly taken aback. What do you mean? I thought you were on a business trip. A business trip? Really? Is that what you told yourself while you were cozying up with your new boyfriend? I spat the words out, unable to hold back any longer. Lorelei's face went pale. Reinhard, it's not what you think. Not what I think? I saw you, Lorelei. I saw you with him, kissing him in our living room. Tears welled up in her eyes. Reinhard, please, let me explain. We sat down at the kitchen table, the silence between us heavy with tension. Lorelei took a deep breath, wiping away her tears. Reinhard, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen, but we've been so distant, and I felt so alone. Alone? I scoffed. You could have talked to me. We could have worked on it together. Instead, you turned to someone else. I know, she whispered, but he was there, and you were always busy with work. I didn't know how to reach you anymore. I stared at her, the woman I had once loved so deeply. Lorelei, if you were unhappy, you should have told me. We could have tried to fix it. But now, I don't know if there's anything left to fix. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. Reinhard, please. I still love you. I stood up, shaking my head. Love? This isn't love, Lorelei. This is betrayal. I need some time to think. I packed a few more of my things and left, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow. The apartment I had rented became my new home, at least for the time being. I filed for divorce a few weeks later, unable to see a future where I could trust Lorelei again. It took me months to heal, but with the support of friends like Friedrich, I slowly started to rebuild my life. I focused on my work, picked up new hobbies, and eventually, I began to feel like myself again. Looking back, I realized that leaving had been the right decision. It forced me to see the truth about my marriage and gave me the strength to move on. As painful as it was, it taught me the importance of communication and trust in a relationship. And for that, I'll always be grateful.